So we're going to be talking about building a better board today. So just a little bit about me. Like Xavier said, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I got to know Jeff back in around 2008, and we built a friendship. At that time, I was running and operating car washes in Atlanta, in Florida, in Alabama, and I don't know, we just started sharing an office because I'd had my third kid and was working from home, and he had been working from home, and I think they had just had their second, and we both got kicked out of our houses. And so we ended up sharing office, having desks next to each other, and really just started helping each other figure out how to grow an organization, how to build a business, how to help people. Jeff and I share a similar heart in that we love to come alongside great people and help them do great things. And so around 2012, he asked me if I would join the plywood board. And I had never been on a board in my life, so this kind of new to me. But I joined, and I love what Jeff was doing. I love the work of plywood people. And so I joined. I'm going to kind of characterize our board meetings at the time. I remember the first board meeting I went to, it lasted about 3 hours, and literally it was nothing but updates by Jeff. And so afterwards I told Jeff that was more of a BORED meeting than it was a board meeting, you know. We had a hard time getting people to come to meetings. No one was really engaged outside of the board meetings. I mean, I'd say nobody was really engaged even during the board meetings. Probably less than 50% of our board actually gave donations or gave contributions to plywood. And back in the day, this is kind of how it worked. Every September, or I guess because the IRS says we have to have a chair and co-chair and secretary. We just put names there. And so the way I became chairman was I actually went to the bathroom during one of those sessions where they were doing that. And I got back and they said, "Oh, you got voted in as chairman." So the joke is always don't go to the bathroom during a board meeting because you might end up becoming the chairman. It really didn't mean anything back then. But as Jeff and I, started working together, we knew that better was possible in terms of board development and just building a better board. And so we just kind of set out to say, we want an engaged board. We want a board that loves, that gives, and so we just try to learn. So I'm just going to share with you 4 learnings today. And like I said, at any point, feel free just to put a question in the chat or raise your hand, and Xavier will let me know, and we'll just kind of discuss it. But so here's the first kind of learning that Jeff and I came across is set clear expectations. Set clear expectations. And then I'm going to add something to that. Do the screen. Set clear expectations. And I would even say ... and don't feel bad about it. And I think that's something that Jeff and I both have had to overcome over the years is man, we feel like these people are we know they're busy, we know they have families, they have other obligations, so it's kind of like, oh, we don't want to ask too much of them. And so we initially operated out of that, of not trying to, we just felt bad about asking them to do too much. But I remember probably in 2016, Jeff and I transitioned to something called Board 2.0. And it's just where we sat down and said, all right, we got to just set clear expectations for the board. So we came up with how many times a year we're going to meet. We talked about expectations of attendance. We talked about what's going to be required of our board outside of board meetings. We meet 4 times a year. And so typically it's about once a quarter. We have a meeting in February, we have one in May, we do an overnight in September, and then we just do a phone call in December. We also set expectations around financial contributions. One thing that we believe in at Plywood is 100% of every board member should be giving to the organization. Now, everybody is going to be able to give at different levels. So we don't expect that everybody gives at the same level. So what we settled on at Plywood is we want Plywood to be in the top 3 of a board member's charitable giving in any given year. And we don't look at tax returns. We don't ask people. We just kind of operate on the assumption that that is what's happening. And we do have periodically come and say, hey, I had a really hard year, and we're not going to be able to give this year. And listen, that happens. We know that, but we coach everybody within the Plywood network to just set that expectation that 100% of board members are giving. And I'll just tell you, as a donor, when people come and ask, other nonprofits come and ask me, for money, or they're raising money for a project, one of my first questions always is, well, how much is the board giving? Or is all the board giving to this? Because to me, if it's not important enough for the board to give to it, then it's hard for me to get excited about it. Also we set expectations on like what specifically we need from each board member. Every board member brings unique gifts and talents. And so we really try to make sure we utilize people's unique gifts. And then we connect with individual board members as often as we can. So Jeff or I will try to take board members to lunch or just get some time with them throughout the year, just to really build that relationship and make sure that they feel loved for. So Board 2.0. So we sat down and we went over this with our board. And I remember the board meeting, and we just said, look, we know that better is possible. Here are some changes that we're going to make. And I told everybody up front, it is absolutely okay if this doesn't fit for you in the future. And so I'm going to follow up with each and every person after the meeting, and we're going to, and you can just let me know if this is something that you want to sign back up for. And thankfully, every single person signed back up. So the first thing is set clear expectations and don't feel bad about it. Did you have something, Xavier? All right. So the second thing, let's see here. Here we go. All right. Kind of the second learning is your board should always be evolving. I keep using the term better is possible. And I just think of it in that mentality. The board that we have today, I still believe that better is possible. I still believe there's things that we can be doing better. In my relationship with my wife, I have a great marriage. I love my wife, but I honestly believe that better is possible. Everything, like that, we should always be evolving. Andy Stanley talks about new, improved, improving. It's just like, man, it's just like this continual cycle. But so we just felt like our board should always be evolving, not just in terms of like a board 2.0 where we're changing expectations, but we do. I mean, we add, we take away, we're changing things on a consistent basis within the board to really kind of meet with the growing organization that Plywood is. But one thing we started doing is we started having term limits for board members to allow new people to join. We didn't have that initially. So we have term limits. You can always re-invite someone back on the board, but once they serve their 2 consecutive terms, then they have to at least be off for a year. Always be recruiting new board members. I mean, we started an advisor program within the Plywood community because we felt like that would be a great kind of pool for us to find new board members in the future. So always be recruiting, always be thinking about the specific needs you have within your organization. And then also always be thinking about diversity. It's not great just to have the same people in the same room. So bring in different thoughts, different strengths, and different backgrounds. Have a dream team list, and I think this is something that Jeff is really good about, is we kind of have this list of people that we ask on a continual basis to be on our board. Most of the time they tell us no, but we've had some say yes. And so have a dream team list. Don't be afraid to ask. Make sure you're setting the expectations up on the front end. Because we just, for us, it's not, we don't want people just to come and fill a seat. We want people to come and add value. And this is something that Jeff and I talk about all the time, is your next board member could be your best board member. And so always be recruiting, always be thinking, always be as a board. The third thing is every board has a culture. Every board has a culture. What are words that you want to be true of your board culture? What do you want people to feel at a board meeting? Two of the words for plywood that we use on a continual basis are engaged and relational. So we want an engaged board, a board that just isn't showing up to hear updates, a board that isn't even thinking about plywood outside of board meetings. We want board members who are engaged in what we're doing. And then we also want a relational board. We want a board that enjoys being together. We want a board that helps each other outside of board meetings, that's invested in whatever it is that the other board members are doing, whether it be family or whether it be business. Like, we want connection. We want relationships to happen at our board meetings. So a couple of things that we do to accomplish that is, just about every single time we get together, outside of our board meeting in December, which is just a phone call, we gather around really good food. And if it's a dinner, then we also add in really good wine. We've got some board members who love wine, and they typically will volunteer just to bring some of the stuff that they have in their cellar. But we gather around really good food, really good wine. We always try to have food catered. But some of our best times as a board happen around the table. The conversations, the relationships that happen. And we really believe that the more relationally connected the board is to one another, the more that they're going to be engaged to what plywood is doing. So I would just challenge you, think about some words that you want to be true of your board culture, and then really start setting up the your board meetings to accomplish those things. All right. Okay. Yeah.
So the first one, how do you deal with board members who think their company's gift is sufficient?
Oh, wow. How do you deal with board members who think their company's gift is sufficient? Well, I guess, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what's the expectation that you're setting in regards to giving for each board member? We can't make people give more money. We don't have those conversations with our board. Now, we do have conversations around, obviously, financial needs. Like when we were building Plywood Place, that was something that was not in our operational budget. So we had to go out and do a building campaign. We started with the board first, and we just really challenged the board to help us get it kicked off. And so I guess I would answer that to saying, you can't make someone give more. You can give them opportunities to give more, but if they're not giving to your desire, maybe the expectations aren't high enough, or potentially maybe that seat could be filled by someone else.
The second question we have is from Jorge. He asks, what are the key characteristics of a brand, of a board member for you and Plywood as you recruit prospects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jorge. So I would say there's a few things that we look for board members. Number one, we look around our community and we think, who's already kind of doing the job of a board member? That's why we started, or one of the reasons we started the Plywood Advisors program. Our advisors get regularly connected to people within our community. They have opportunities to regularly give to things at Plywood. It's not a requirement for our advisors, but they have opportunities to give. And so when we're looking to build a seat, we're looking in that community, in the community of the advisors, saying, who are people already invested in what we're doing, passionate about what Plywood is doing? And then we also look for humility. I think that's one characteristic of our board, is there's no big egos in the room. Or if there are, they at least check them at the door. Because, and I think this goes back to connecting relationally. The more connected we are to one another, the easier it is to listen to other people. We have a lot of differing opinions, but at the end of the day, we're all able to put down what we think is right and say what is best for Plywood. So I would say, look for people who are already passionate about what you're doing, involved in what you're doing, and then look for humility.
Perfect. All right, we're going to go on to the next slide. And then
All right, so this is the last point, and then we'll be able to jump back to some more questions. And I personally think this is one of the more important learnings, is let someone else lead the board. So I assume most everybody on this call is probably an executive director or founder or some kind of leader of your organization. There's lots of pressure that already come with being the founder or the leader of the organization. So take the pressure off yourself and let someone else lead the board. Ideally, this would be the chairman, chairperson. And this is going back to where the joke about don't go to the bathroom or you might get voted in as chairman. This is where I think that kind of attitude needs to change. Chairman or chairperson shouldn't just be a title that's filled for the IRS, but it should be a position that truly adds value. That adds value to the board and adds value to the executive director. So I think of my role as chairman, I think there's two main responsibilities I have. One is communicate with and really care for Jeff as the executive director. And then the second thing is to take the pressure off of Jeff and lead the board. So I'm responsible for planning board meetings. I think about the food. I think about the environment. I think about the location. I think I get together with Jeff about a month beforehand and we sit down and I'd say, what are the objectives that you really need us to focus on at this board meeting? He usually comes with about 10 and I say, all right, we're going to deal with about 2 or 3 of those. And I make sure that each board member is ready. A couple of years ago, we transitioned to having teams within the board. So Plywood has 5 teams. We have a financial team, we have a content team, we have a fundraising team, we have a Plywood community team, and then we have a Plywood advisor team. So we've got 15 people on our board, and we have 3 people. Well, yeah, 3 people on each of those teams, although I'm not on any of the teams. So only, there's one team that only has 2 people, but because I'm really on all the teams, I guess. But I make sure that every team is ready for the board meeting, that they've worked on what they've needed to work on, that they're ready to communicate what they need to communicate. And typically our board meetings now consist of every team giving updates and getting feedback from the board on things they're working on. And one thing to note, Jeff is only on one of those teams. He's on the content team, but he's not really. I mean, he's involved somewhat on like all the other teams, but that really kind of helps the pressure not just fall on Jeff to basically be leading all the teams. But all right, so going back to the two main roles of chairman, care for the executive director. I mean, listen, Jeff talked about it earlier. Leadership can be really lonely. Leadership can be lonely. And so to have somebody in your corner that you can rely on, that you can call on, I think is critical. And then have the chairman lead the board. So here's just a lot of times people ask, well, what do you look for in a chairman? That's something that Jeff and I get quite a bit. So I'm just got three quick things, and then we'll just jump to any questions that y'all have. The first thing is look for someone that has time. You know, I've got time to commit to this position. If I was working 50, 60 hours a week, probably wouldn't be able to have the time to be involved in it. Look for someone that you trust and that others trust as well. I think it really helped that Jeff and I were friends before all this because there was already some level of trust. And then also just look for someone that you enjoy being with and that you work well with. Jeff and I, we enjoy being together. We give each other a hard time. We joke about Big Ten and SEC football. I mean, there's, you know, like our families know each other and we enjoy being around each other. So it's easy for us to go to lunch and talk about what's going on in his life, my life, and what's going on with the board. So that's all I got in terms of just kind of the learnings of building a better board.